Welcome, everyone, to the Disruptive Jam. My name is Carrie Forbes, and I am your resident DJ. That's Disruptive Jammer, and really happy to have you join me on this podcast. It's a place where we get to talk about all of the things that surprise us, that throw us off, but also become our opportunities. So let's get started. Well, welcome, George Butters, to the Disruptive Jam. I have your resume because I was going to do a bio, but here's the thing. There's not really one particular title, I think, that really encapsulates who you are and what you do, which is really the theme of what we're going to be doing today. I call it the Innovation Beat. And we're going to explore. So I think one thing we'll look at, you're the president of the Canadian Freelance Guild. You are still CEO of New Media Drive, or Just Fred Inc., CTO, Fog Studios. I mean, it goes on. And we're going to get into more of that as we meander. But this is the thing that I think encapsulates the whole episode today. And I will get you to talk about it just a minute, which is I'm fascinated by the evolving intersection of technology and communication. And that was at the very top of your resume. So, George, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Technology and communications. It's a really great place to live. It's fascinating. It's been changing forever. And trying to not just follow that evolution, but kind of know where the puck might be going. That's been a challenge, and it's been just absolutely fascinating. The other reaction people get when they look at my resume is, this guy can't keep a job.
Let me first ask you this question. How did you go from heavy equipment operator to legal clerk?
Oh, well, it all comes down to my fascination with typewriters. And that started when my mother gave me a typewriter. I think I was 15 or 16, and she gave me this little portable thing that was, you look back on it now and say, how could you possibly type on it? But I learned not just to type, but to touch type. And these were the days where there was never a man in the secretarial course. Like, boys didn't do that. Boys went to wood shop and, an electric shop, and I went to print shop. But typing turned out to be a superpower, right? So I was working in heavy equipment, construction, driving big stuff, right? Bulldozers, front-end loaders, that kind of thing. And I was in the office one day, and the manager said to me, "Do you know what a typewriter is?" And I said, "Of course I do. I do type." And he said, "How would you like to work in the office instead of being out there in the rain and the mud?" Anybody who has ever used a steel bar to get clay-like mud out of the tracks of a bulldozer would jump at an opportunity like that. So I did. And, through all of this, it's the keyboard. It's always come down to the keyboard. That touch typing has just been a magical skill, and I'm so glad I had it.
Okay, so, and I mean, that is fascinating. I mean, I think about, first of all, you had a skill that was really, before even anybody really knew, I was a generation where we had to start learning keyboarding, but it was still more of a secretarial. And I was in between. I remember my mother saying, well, if you don't want to be a secretary, don't take it. However, that did become a necessity for coding and all of that. So you've got technology, and I can see where the keyboard goes there. And you've also, as I look at your resume, you've got a lot of journalism in there. So Tell us about that.
Oh, I think that came from my love of reading. And that came from having born with really terrible eyesight, with requiring an operation just before I turned 4. And one of the doctors recommended that my parents teach me how to read and get me to read on a regular basis, that would be good exercise for my eyes. So the drill became the newspaper arrived home. I got the newspaper. My dad got home from work, and as he sat down, had his cup of tea and all the rest, relaxed, I read the newspaper to him. And I did that from the time I was 4 years old. So by the time we moved around quite a bit because we were moving from Scotland to Canada, and it took a while. The first there was some holdup. They thought my dad had a spot on his lung, and then there was some other thing. So we moved ready to go, and then we didn't go. And that happened a couple of times. And I ended up leaving the last school before we got on the boat. And my teacher gave me, so that I'm like 6 years old at this point, almost turned 7. My teacher gave me a book, and it was Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Now, that's heavy reading for a teenager, but she figured I was ready for it. And sure enough, I read that. I read the first half of the book on the trip across the ocean. So stories have been a part of my life as long as I can remember.
And it's interesting because it's, both the typewriter and this opportunity came out of something that perhaps wasn't necessarily a benefit at the time, right? But has led to, I'm going to call it being on the edge of the wedge. So this is the thing. And when we look at all of the ventures that you've been in, so you've been a journalist, heavy equipment, legal clerk, but also talk about technology. And it seems to me like, you started up Smarty Pants and ventures even well before that when the internet was just getting started. So how did you end up in those spaces?
That came from the problem. So here's the problem. I moved from Ontario to Cape Breton, and I've been working in weekly newspapers in Ontario. And so now I'm in Cape Breton, in rural Cape Breton. I want to continue doing that, but the publishers of the magazines and the newspapers, the publishers are almost entirely in Toronto. So how do you compete with somebody who's down the street? Well, what you do is you figure out, how can I get my content there faster than they can? And that became a conversation with the technology people at the newspapers. The first one was the Toronto Star. And I convinced the editorial side to let me talk to the techies in the print side, because I knew that they were getting stuff electronically. So the trick was, how do I take my computer, my little, $900 laptop, I'm not kidding, a battery-powered laptop. Today it would probably cost about $100, but it was $900. So I bought that, and it gave me the ability to connect with their systems. So now, instead of the person in Toronto who's taking the typewritten stuff in, I'm putting my stories and my ideas right into their pile.
Wow.
And I was able to leapfrog from that newspaper to other papers, because I wrote for papers across the country and magazines as well. And what a competitive advantage that was.
Well, yeah, you have the typing already. And that gets you the foot into, the journalism space. You're very well read at this point and able at a high level to also learn. And this is the piece that I think is so interesting. So you figure out, hey, this new technology, that's going to solve this problem.
Right.
There you go. So I'm thinking about that now. I'm jumping around this is not a linear career dive that we're doing here whatsoever. But let's look at what you are doing right now with AI and where that's taken you on this journey now.
AI, boy, I've technology was part of my beat always. I was the person in the newsroom who actually read the manual and knew how the stuff worked that we were using. Nobody else wanted to read the manual. They just wanted to use it. So now, I was well aware of what was going on with machine learning, but it wasn't accessible for the average person. And then in September 2022, or October, when ChatGPT 3.5 was launched, I was there the first day. I started calling all my friends that I knew would be diving into this. And it was like, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And then it was try. And it is especially then, it was a very frustrating process to figure out that this genius tool was also an idiot. And it was, imagine the best intern you could imagine, speaks 47 languages, can do computer code, just on and on and on, and then is on crack every Wednesday. So it's this amazing tool, but as somebody once said, you got electricity, you have electrocution. So you have this incredibly powerful, useful tool that sometimes completely goes off the rails. It lies to you. It makes things up because, it's trying to be nice and do what you want. And teaching people how to use that safely, securely, ethically, and productively. Because it will take you down cul-de-sacs, down black holes. And the only way you learn how to do that is, I like quotes. But this one I'll paraphrase. And it's one of my favorites from Mark Twain. There are things you can learn holding a cat by the tail that you can't learn any other way. Okay? You can't explain it to somebody. Just pick up a cat, hold it up, you'll get the message. And I think that applies to a lot of things. And generative AI is a cat. You have to pick it up. You got to let it scratch you. You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But you have to have the time to do that, not just the interest. And one of the issues that I'm seeing, and I think it afflicts a lot of organizations, is they have really high expectations about this great thing, generative AI. It's going to do all this wonderful stuff. But it's like riding a bicycle. You can't just give somebody a bike and say, ride. You've got to give them time to learn. They may need training wheels for a while. They may need a small bike. Yeah. And they'll work their way up, and eventually they'll get to the point that they can jump on this thing and make it work.
So that's, I think, the inherent wisdom of what you're bringing to the table. And that we do have this, I'd say, especially in how rapid technology has been changing in our society, almost an amnesia to what can happen when it goes sideways. So that every time there's a new, a new release, a new update, and people get really excited, not just our own human need for, this is so cool, I want to dive into it, but look at how we fund it with venture capital, how we prioritize, all of those kinds of things. So when we think about that, I'd say what you're also teaching people in how to use it, and you talked a little bit about ethically, how does that kind of play into what we can do with the means of I guess, the edge of technology of where we are?
One of the things that I have many things to thank you for. One of them was exposure to Gartner and Gartner knowledge base. And one of the magical moments from Gartner was seeing their hype cycle. And everybody who knows this knows the graph. Hype cycle is like, wow, this is amazing. We're going to be zillionaires. And wait a minute, it lied to me. I just took that into court and I gave that to the judge and it's not real. I'm in big trouble here. What am I going to do? Then you get onto this kind of, well, I guess I better learn. I guess I better put training wheels on. I better put the time in. And if you do that, at some point, ideally, you'll get into what they call the plateau of productivity.
Yes.
And that's where you want to be. But you can't always see that. When you're looking up and going, oh, this is amazing, this is phenomenal, and then you're crashed into the depth, you're not seeing this stuff. But if you think about this, every new technology that has that kind of spark goes through this.
I also heard one time, and this was actually, it was funny, it was a Bitcoin conference. And there were law enforcement that were doing a presentation about, different aspects of it. And they said every legitimate technology gets gained by the criminals first. And that's how we learn. And I always thought that was really interesting.
I'm going to stop you here for a minute. I was an evangelist for the internet, right? I was in New Brunswick. The phone company gave me stuff. It was like, you get it, go do it. I just wanted to be a content guy, but I couldn't find anybody to put my content on the internet. So that's how we became an internet company. Solving a problem, our problem.
And there it is again. And actually, I was going to ask you about that because I do remember that era very well. I was at Dalhousie in my early years of being a student and in the Killam Library, where for the first time we got to go on the internet and you needed an actual IP number then. So they were just bringing in Mosaic browser at the time. But at that point, I remember talking to people about it and they're going like, oh, you're such a dork, like at the time, but there was this, future vision again. And I remember the professor talking about it then. you're going to be on beaches doing work. People will be able to go wherever. You're not going to be kind of shackled, which could also, how we work could change. So take me back to when you made that decision. I know you were solving a problem, but.
Well, there's a bunch of magical days along the way. I just got a shot in my head. I was covering a murder trial in Port Hood, and I had my little Radio Shack laptop. And I always wrote trials. They're all the same except for he won, he lost, right? So smart reporter is going to write the in-between stuff early. So they're taking a break for trial. It was a beautiful sunny day. The sun was actually working. And I took off my shoes and socks, and I took my little laptop, and I sat on the beach. It's a little tiny beach, and I wrote my story. And, got it all dried up, sand in my shoes, went back up, and they said, where were you? And I said, I was out on the beach writing my story. And it's like, how could you do that? And then the magic of connecting the computer for the first time to a payphone. Mm-hmm. Well, this one was in downtown Toronto, sending a story back to New Brunswick from a payphone that used to be at the corner of Yonge and Bloor.
Wow.
I mean, having those things happen, you just go. But when I was doing my evangelism for the internet, this is coming, it's going to be big, one of the things I remember saying to people, the internet right now is being driven by porn. And that was the reality. Dirty pictures made the internet from the beginning.
Which actually isn't that different from film. When you go back to, if anybody knows what a penny opera was, way, way back, and isn't that sort of humanity? It's that or Cats, one of the two.
Yeah. Well, look at W.D. Griffith's, the first film in the U.S. was about the Ku Klux Klan.
And that was the first long-term feature film.
Yeah.
So when we, again, technology can be used in the, like we said, it's sort of, we like to think about it as having a character in and of itself, but it's a neutral thing. It's what we as humans do with that and our behaviors. So I have another, sort of related to, how technology not only changed the work itself, but the way in which we work. And I'm thinking about your role with Zoom. And in particular, how that changed, say, the nature of work for you.
Well, okay. First of all, I was doing a lot of video productions for people, annual general meetings, stuff like that. And especially something that was tricky, right? If you're working in financial services, as you know, you've got a high risk factor involved. You're going to have lawyers watching what you're doing and how you do them. How is the voting conducted? All of that stuff, right? And you're dealing with people's money. I always wanted to be able to take those things and deliver them to the people who couldn't get there. And this came out partly from a frustration I had with one of the organizations I belonged to. It got to the point that, instead of this large-ass government funding, you can send all your members and, that's okay. It went from 40 or 50% of the members showing up for annual meetings to less than 5%. Mm-hmm. Well, that's undemocratic, for one.
Yeah.
And why should the 95% pay for the 5% to go there? That seemed even strikingly worse. So I kept saying, I can stream this. Mm-hmm. Let me stream it. And, oh, no, we can, that'd be so hard. 95% of the setup to do a production is all in the room. 5% is sending it out. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, that's a specialized 5%. There's skill sets that you need. There are things that you need to know that can go wrong and probably will. But if you can do that, that's the easy part. Trying to convince people to do that was the toughest part of all.
Isn't it always, though? And
Yep.
I mean, I do a lot of work in digital transformation. Actually, I just did a little short video today that just talked about you don't transform things. You don't actually manage projects. It's the people that are doing the work or affected or communicate in that way. So I think that's what's interesting is when right now I'm thinking about there's such a pushback toward, say, the remote work. We see that from corporate, entities that are, mandates to go back and a lot of discussion of it doesn't work. So what's your thoughts on that?
Can I say bullshit on that one?
You
I
just
just did.
You just
Okay.
did.
So it doesn't work. I worked for Fog Studios, and Fog Studios was the founding company in the video game industry that represented game developers when they were negotiating with the big gaming companies. This is a big deal because a lot of people really got their, they walked out naked. They were stripped of their content. And Fog Studios' deal was, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to get good deals for our people. So when Fog, this was part of a merger with us, and part of the deal was that we were really early on with AOL Canada. They were the gorilla, the 5,000-pound gorilla on the internet in those days. They were Google, they were Amazon, they were all of that. And they got us access to their AOL chat, which was like completely brand new, fabulous. And the way it worked was, you know how you logged into the office? You signed into your AOL chat account. That's how I knew you were there. That's how we communicated.
And back then, like today.
This is 1990s.
Like, that didn't exist anywhere, right? Like,
no, that was all brand new.
Yeah.
And what a competitive advantage it gave us because we were communicating in real time around the world. Fog wasn't a U.S.-Canadian company. We had an office in Germany. We had an office in London. We had an office in Philly. We had an office in Las Vegas. And we had an office in Tokyo.
And so and it's interesting. I, in the 90s, was in a lot of the contact center environments. And again, very early days. And a lot of people forgot, maybe because we weren't using video, but we were often using, telephony, phones,
Right.
conference calls. But it was the same idea of interconnected teams in that way. So the nature of work has been changing, probably will continue to change. So what do you think? Okay, so I'm going to get you to think about the future state. Where do you think the next evolution of technology that's really going to impact us? What do you think that's going to be?
Boy, that's a hard one. There's so much on the plate right now. And we know that everything old is new again. Everything new is old again. You can look back and see, why are we doing it? Because we started way back when. I think it has to be what we're already building on. I think it's clearly related to AI.
Yeah.
It's clearly related to wireless. I'm seeing stories about wireless, 6.5 kilometer wireless connection. That's a game changer.
Imagine no wires in your house.
Imagine no wires in your house.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is going to be are ordinary people going to take back the internet?
Ooh, that's a juicy one.
It is.
It is, because I think about back in the inception and Tim Berners-Lee way back, when we started the HTTP, and the first sort of principles were about it not being taken over commercially, economic interests. But look at where we are now. And then we think about the metaverse, which is just an extension of cryptocurrency, which again is very much about democracy by finance. Not financial democracy, but...
No, but the criminals have been the first to really exploit it fully, the same way porn was fully exploiting the ability to send dirty pictures across the internet.
So this is, I think, and probably a really key thing and again, sort of a theme along technology change. It is people, no matter what form it comes in, that are going to drive that change, right? For the good or bad. And so for your point, if people will take that internet back or take that digital space back, yeah.
I think it probably will start with individual frustration about being tracked so heavily. And, we have a surveillance state. It's not the state, it's commerce, it's companies, corporations that are doing this to us. And look at we're so exposed to the power of large internet corporations. So somebody builds a presence, they build a business on Facebook, and then Facebook goes,
Yeah.
Like that, fly here. They don't care. I mean, they've destroyed lives. They've destroyed companies. Yes, people have built. The same thing is liable to happen on YouTube. The same thing is liable to happen on Twitter.
Really, any platform, right?
Any platform you don't own.
Yeah.
And you're not even a renter. When it's free, you have no control whatsoever.
And
that's why I control my own website.
So that, I think, as we solve all the problems of the world, it leaves me with this thought, and I'm going to kind of go back to where we started. You know, often in a career or in a journey along life, you know, a lot of times people think that there's a very linear way in which we sort of plan these things out. But for you, that hasn't been the case. So if you were to sum up, though, I think the journey and leave somebody with a thought on, you know, how to be that person who is always, you know, kind of at the edge of where things are going and that sort of, you know, awareness, what would you say?
There was a strategy at times. So one of the strategies was I knew how to write at an early age. The typewriter just unleashed me. The electric typewriter, then a digital keyboard, that was like, wow, okay, now I can really go at this. Being able to talk and have that converted into text, massively powerful. So we've got that part. But once I kind of figured that out, I went, okay, so how did communication evolve? Well, it started with like shareable communication. Started with words. And there is some evidence that social media started with cave paintings. People were making little comments on the site, and you could see the same person going from painting to painting. Okay, so there's some social networking going on there. So it went from that to images, right? So that said, good, pick up a camera, learn how to shoot. Well, if you're going to do that, then sound is the next part, isn't it? So get a microphone, learn how that works, try it, play around. I mean, it was rudimentary tools and pretty crappy results, but at least I got to that part and then I went, okay, would you put them all together? What you get is television. So I bit the bullet and I took a job in television as an employee. This is not a word that I'm comfortable with on my part. I don't mind I love working with people. I love doing projects. I love working with teams, but I'm not a happy employee. That's just because it's just the same thing. I'm out of the decision-making process, right? So once you have television and radio say, well, there's connectivity. So, and the minute I saw the internet, I was done. Like that was it. I was finished, all right? So, that was really purposeful, but part of it too was I grew up in a union household. My first real job was a union job in a paper factory, okay? I mean, there's the connection again. And I've always been a proponent of associations for freelancers. We do better as a group than we do individually. We have a stronger voice. There's all kinds of other things you get from that. So there was a clear path, and the path was, how can I use technology to improve my ability to communicate?
Amazing.
That's what it comes down to.
And I think you just summed up where we began, that intersection of technology and communication. And the last piece, which I know I'm gonna cap it off with this, which is curiosity. So thank you, George, first of all, for sating our curiosity to learn more and about your, I think, disruptive background, which fits our show perfectly. So I just want to extend my thanks for being here. I know we could have probably kept talking for another 2 hours, but
at least that's what we normally do when we get together, isn't it? It was what we did on day one, as I remember.
This is absolutely
Your
true.
boss came looking for you after our 15-hour meeting went for almost 2 hours.
That's true.
Yeah,
That is true.
so there you go. Thank you.
Wow, what an interview. And I have more than just a few final thoughts, but I'm going to keep it really succinct because when I think about George, he really does live the disruptive jam concept. He can bring together all of these elements that don't really seem to have any connection and really come away with something brand new. He shows us that leadership is not about that stable, safe walk, but about productive disruption. He crosses science, art, and technology and communication. And that, to me, is a thread that I've seen through a lot of the Disruptive Jam people that I meet. He often shows us that constraints are catalysts for innovation. And of course, the storytelling. What can you say? That's how we really show effective leadership and share all of these wonderful narratives about the future. So thanks to George, and thanks to you for listening. And until next time, we'll see you later on the Disruptive Jam.